welcome to today's episode of Historic St. Louis. I am your host, Justin, and today we are going to be talking about Times Beach, Missouri, the Route 66 State Park, and the Dioxin Crisis. So let's go ahead and dive right on into it. Give me one moment here and let me change some things on my screen and pop in so you can see me and say hi. First of all, hello everybody. Welcome to Historic St. Louis. It is good to see all of you whenever you're watching this video, and I'm happy that you guys came back to continue this series on nuclear waste and how dangerous it is in St. Louis. So let's go ahead and pop this slide open and take a deeper dive into what is going on here. So, Times Beach, Missouri, and Route 66 State Park. First thing I think I want to address is where this actually is. It is in St. Louis County off of Highway 44, right where the old Route 66 was, hence the name of the park. And basically, that's what it is now. It's a state park. The sign that you are seeing on the screen right now is a sign that was blocking off the bridge, which was the main entry into the town for a very long time, when they discovered the dioxin that was there. I will get into explaining what dioxin is a little bit later into this video, but something very cool and weird and just kind of interesting overall about this park is that bridge that you are actually seeing behind that sign, the foundation for the bridge is still there. There's no road on it and it's still blocked off. The cost to repair it was just too high, so that's what you see. You can still get into what was Times Beach and Route 66 State Park by taking an exit on the eastbound side of the highway. If you're going westbound, the only thing you're going to be able to get to is the visitor center, which we will also take a look at. So let's go ahead and dive right on into it. One moment here. Alright, so that visitor center that I mentioned, if you are going westbound and get off the highway where you see the signs for Route 66 State Park, is right there in that picture that you're seeing on your screen on that top left corner. It used to be a roadhouse and kind of like a grocery store for the town. A lot of things are there. So I'm going to be reading a lot of this word for word. Most of this information is off Wikipedia and sourced by the EPA. I myself have been to this park quite a few times. Very, very beautiful place now, but kind of a crazy history. It's our own little ghost town here in St. Louis. Just so happens it became a state park. So, Times Beach was founded in 1925 on a floodplain on the Merrimack River as a promotion by the now-defunct St. Louis Star-Times newspaper. So, in order to own land in what was called Times Beach, you would purchase a 20 by 100 foot, which is a 6 by 30 meter plot of land, for $67.50, and it included a 6-month newspaper subscription. So the goal here was actually to get subscribers to their newspaper to compete with the larger St. Louis Post-Dispatch, which still exists today. That's why it was called Times Beach, because the newspaper, the Times, that in itself is kind of interesting. It's not something you would think of, and it was really built as like a summer resort. It was definitely wealthier people that originally had land there. Over time, that changed. So, as it says here, in the early years, town was primarily a summer resort, but during the Great Depression, combined with gasoline rationing during World War II, reduced the feasibility of summer homes. So basically, people no longer had that expendable income, so they couldn't own a second home. Keep in mind, what they purchased on the property originally was just the land, so it still cost money to actually build a house or whatever you were going to do with that land. So the town ends up becoming a community of low-income housing with a very small population, only 1,240 people by 1970. Immediately before its evacuation, Times Beach had become a lower-middle-class town. So not a lot of money in that area, lower-middle-class. Some would argue that it was even more low-class, right on that border. Not the nicest houses. As you can kind of see in the picture here, very modest homes. That's what it was. Historically, there had always been a small grocery store and gas station on Route 66 to serve the residents. So that restaurant and roadhouse that you're looking at, it also did serve as a gas station and a grocery store at one point. So that's what they are referring to there. And guys, I hope I'm not boring you too much with this style of video where it's basically a PowerPoint presentation and me hiding in a corner talking to you, but I think it's the best way to get the detailed information across before I actually take you to the location and show you around, which is what I'm hoping to have. I believe next week is when I have that scheduled for. So Here in this picture, we see another sign in the background, danger, do not enter, possible contamination. We will get into why that is in a minute. And one of the Times Beach Police Department officers there. So, IPC, a chemical supplier company, knew very little about waste disposal and subcontracted a company called Napaco to Russell Martin Bliss, the owner of a small and local waste oil business, charging Napaco $3,000 per load. IPC paid Bliss $125 per load. So, between February and October of 1971, and as we mentioned, the town's population was about 1,240 then, Bliss collected 6 truckloads, which is 18,500 gallons of chemical waste heavily contaminated with dioxin. Bliss took most of the still bottoms full of that material to a storage facility near Frontenac, where the waste was then unloaded and mixed into tanks containing used crankcase oils. So he was mixing it basically with used motor oil. Some of the contaminated oil was sold to M.T. Richards, a fuel company in Illinois, and to the Midwest Oil Refining Company in Overland, Missouri. In addition to the waste oil business, Bliss owned a horse arena and farm where he sprayed waste oils to control the problem of dust. One application kept the dust down for several months, and those who visited Bliss's property were so impressed by how well the technique worked that he ended up selling it as a dust suppressant service. So, basically, we have a guy here. He owns an oil business. He was pretty well off. And he owns a horse arena. Well, on a horse arena, obviously, there's a lot of dust that's being kicked up, different gravel roads and things around the property. In order to control that, he sprayed them down with this waste oil, which also happened to contain dioxin, which was from the chemical supplier. And they didn't know much about it at the time. Neither did he. So while I am waiting for this next slide to load up for you guys so I can actually read it to you, basically dioxin is used in the making of Agent Orange and different chemical weapons, and that's something that greatly relates to the Weldon Springs site, greatly relates to Westlake Landfill, and really the history of all kinds of things happening there. And give me one moment. It appears we lost it. I'm not one to edit these videos if I don't need to. I would much rather show you guys unedited and just talk about it from start to finish. So let me see if I can get it open for you again. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. So, on May 26, 1971, the owners of the Shenandoah stable, which was in Moscow Mills, paid Bliss $150 to spray the floor of their indoor arena. So he did that. It was about 2,000 gallons of that uncharacteristically thick oil, which left a pungent, burning odor. Within a few days of that spray, birds began to drop dead from the rafters of the barns, and horses began to develop sores and lose their hair. They blamed those occurrences on Bliss, who denied responsibility, saying all he had sprayed on their land was basically the old motor oil. Obviously, that wasn't true. They removed the top 6 inches of the soil from the arena and disposed of it in a landfill. That landfill happened to be near Lambert St. Louis International Airport. Despite the removal of another 12 inches of soil a few months later, the horses that came to the arena still became ill, and after several months, 62 horses died or became so emaciated that they had to be euthanized. Their 2 daughters also became ill, developing headaches, nosebleeds, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. So, obviously, at this point, we're starting to see that something's wrong. The dioxin and the other things in this oil are not just making animals sick, but they're making humans sick too. So, a month after spraying at Shenandoah, he was also hired to spray at the Timberline stables near Jefferson City, Missouri. Another 12 horses died, and children exposed to the arena were diagnosed with chloracne, a skin condition associated with dioxin poisoning. Also, of course, they believed that Bliss was the source of their problems. Obviously, he was. They removed theirs as well. Bubbling Springs Ranch in St. Louis, same situation. The owners decided to move the soil, and they ended up having it removed by 1973. However, instead of taking theirs to a landfill, he buried the soil on one of his properties. So that's kind of interesting. Probably why we didn't hear much about it after that. But the unexplained deaths and illnesses at Shenandoah immediately caught the attention of the CDC. And in August 1971, the CDC completed an inspection of the Shenandoah stable and collected human and blood samples as well as soil samples. And the soil samples collected from Shenandoah contained over 30 ppm of dioxin. Although little was known about the effects of dioxin on humans, the lethality of small doses in animals was alarming. So as a result, the CDC immediately set out to locate other possible sites of contamination. And when located by the CDC, Bliss stated that he did not know where the dioxin could have come from. Obviously, that wasn't true. They were able to trace it back to Napaco, and the rest is history there. So what you're seeing there is the Times Beach water tower. From what I can tell here, it looks like after the town was evacuated, most of the homes and things that were built there are already gone. But something important here that we haven't talked about yet. In that picture, you notice that all of the roads are dirt roads. Dirt roads spray up dust, so you kind of see where we're going with that. So in 1972, this is where we get to the connection to Times Beach. That there is a picture of the Times Beach Bible Church after it was basically evacuated. And then the background is kind of just an overview of that area with Highway 44. So in 1972, Times Beach hired Bliss to spray oil on 23 miles of dirt roads. Due to lack of funding, they were unable to pave the roads. So for $2,400, he sprayed 160,000 gallons of waste oil in Times Beach over a period of 4 years. The release of the leaked EPA document in 1982 was the first time that Times Beach learned of its contamination. So residents felt betrayed and publicly criticized the EPA for not informing them of the toxic hazard around their homes. Since Times Beach had the largest population out of the listed sites, Times Beach became the subject of national media and attention. With pressure from the public, the EPA soon began investigation in Times Beach. Soil sampling was fortuitously completed on December 3rd, 1982, a day before Times Beach suffered its worst flood in history when the Merrimack River, which runs immediately next to Times Beach right through that park, suffered its worst flood in history and breached its banks and rose over 14 feet above flood stage, also taking with it some of that dioxin. So the residents of Times Beach were evacuated, and by the time the waters began to recede, the EPA had concluded its analysis, and results revealed dioxin concentrations as high as 0.3 ppm along the town's entire network of roads. So basically, the dioxin that was there would have killed any animals that were on the property, and would have made any humans anywhere near the property incredibly sick. So where this story really begins is there was a company, Napaco, that was making a chemical, dioxin, which is used in the making of Agent Orange. They didn't know what to do with it, so they hired this man named Bliss. Well, Bliss didn't know what to do with it either, but he took it from him, and they paid him to take it, so he took the job. He was just looking for the money. He mixed it with waste oil. He sprayed it on dirt roads at his own property, sprayed it in that horse arena. It worked well as far as keeping things down, and when he started, it didn't have as much of the contamination in it, so he didn't see the problem right away. But as soon as it went onto these other properties and the horses started to die, that didn't stop him. He was still getting paid to do jobs, so he was still taking the jobs. Alright, so getting later in, to 1982 and beyond, first of all, as you can see, the current Route 66 Visitor Center that I showed you a picture of on the other slide, that was it when it was Steiny's Inn, famous for fine food. It was basically just a restaurant and roadhouse overlooking the Merrimack River on Highway 66 before 44 was there, out in Eureka, Missouri. So, kind of cool to see that building in a different stage of its life. But anyway, on December 3rd, 1982, the CDC publicly recommended that Times Beach not be re-inhabited. Officials were uncertain about the health effects of extensive dioxin exposure and uncertain of how to rid an entire town of dioxin. Because the town was situated on the floodplain, officials were further concerned that subsequent flooding would spread the contamination beyond control. Most likely it would have. Discussions of a federal buyout commenced on January 7th, 1983, when President Ronald Reagan created the Times Beach Dioxin Task Force, which consisted of representatives from the EPA, the CDC, and FEMA, and the Army Corps of Engineers. During a press conference on February 22nd, 1983, the EPA announced that the federal government would pay $33 million of the estimated $36.7 million cost to buy out the 800 residential properties and 30 businesses of Times Beach. The remaining $3.7 million became the responsibility of the state of Missouri. So by 1985, the entire population of well over 2,000 residents at this point had been relocated, and Governor of Missouri at the time, John Ashcroft, issued an executive order for the town's disincorporation. And then, since it contained over 50% of dioxin in the state of Missouri, since it contained over 50% of dioxin in the state of Missouri and was no longer inhabited, Times Beach was the logical choice for the placement of a new incinerator. The construction of the incinerator began in June of 1995. So, between the period of 1982 and 1995, the town was evacuated. By 1985, everybody was gone. From 1985 to 1995, it just sat there as a ghost town. You couldn't go in or out of the town. There were large fences on either side. Kind of a personal connection for me. I remember my uncle was a very adventurous person growing up, and I remember him driving up the highway exit to Times Beach, but you would get so far up the exit and there would be a large metal gate there that they closed off, locked up, and it said, "Do not enter, no trespassing." I mean, it was a scary sign because it mentioned dioxin and said you could get cancer beyond this point. I mean, it was terrifying. But I remember that well. It was a ghost town. Nothing was there, just the empty homes and no people. So, yeah. Once the incinerator was built, it burned more than 265,000 tons of dioxin-contaminated materials from across the state, and the cleanup in Missouri was completed in 1997 and cost close to $200 million. So, when they cleaned up the dioxin, they did get some from landfills and some from the farms and some from the private properties, as well as everything in Times Beach. They covered as much as they could at a pretty hefty price tag. But that's what led to Route 66 State Park. So let's get a little more into that. So the land that was once Times Beach is now Route 66 State Park. One building from the town does still exist, as I mentioned. It's currently the park's visitor center. It was once a roadhouse, as well as a grocery store and a gas station from the glory days of Times Beach. And it was the EPA's headquarters for the area while they were working on this cleanup. There's a large grass mound beneath, which is the debris of the demolished buildings of the former town. The EPA revisited and tested the soil in the park in June of 2012, and on November 19th, it was reported that the soil samples showed no significant health risks for park visitors or workers. I can't say much because it's not like I've spent my whole life there, but I've been there a few times. It's a very basic park. There's some trails throughout it that are paved. There's some shelters. The visitor center is amazing. There's a museum that's not just dedicated to Times Beach, but also the history of Route 66, which is something that's very cool to have here in St. Louis. So my goal is to take you guys there and show you both of those things, the history of Route 66 and the history of Times Beach, a little bit more in detail. They have some of the police uniforms there, some of the newspaper articles, things like that, which are pretty cool to take a look at. So that's basically the story of Times Beach, a town that was completely destroyed by one man's greed and spreading used motor oil mixed with a chemical on the ground to prevent dust. So this town's fate came from them trying not to get dust to kick off up a road. So that is all I have on this for now. Give me one moment here. As far as other things about nuclear waste in St. Louis, like I said, I am hoping next weekend that I can go out to Route 66 State Park, show you the museum on the property, as well as showing you some of the parts of the park. I did find that grass mound last time I was there, so that was cool. So I'd love to show you guys that. The week after that, I believe I wanted to talk about Westlake Landfill and maybe some of the other sites around St. Louis that are more directly related to nuclear waste. So I hope you guys learned something from this video. I hope it was fun, and I'll see you next time.